Thank you for viewing this forum. My name is Kimberley Crockett, and I am a Political Action Chair for the Eastern Panhandle Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And together with the membership of the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County, we are pleased to offer you this debate forum for your consideration. In this era of COVID-19, we're bringing you this debate forum via Zoom in an effort to educate the larger community about the 2020 general elections and several local offices that have contested races, while also maintaining appropriate social distancing. Therefore, the EPAC chapter of Deltas and the League of Women Voters thank all the candidates who have participated in this year's virtual debate forums. We are pleased to present the candidates for Jefferson County Sheriff: Mike Chapman, Tom Hansen, John King, Steve Cox, and Gregory Lance. Candidates, we will begin this forum by offering you each 30 seconds to introduce yourself to the viewers. We will then ask each of you questions submitted by our organization's members, allowing 1 minute for your responses. Finally, we will close with a 1-minute wrap-up where each of you will have additional time to offer any other information you would like the viewers to consider. Let's begin our forum. Gentlemen, please offer your 30-second introductions. We will begin with Mr. Chapman.
Background is business, finance, and information technology. I've spent the last 30 years making organizations more efficient, more cost-effective, and more customer service-oriented. I served as a reserve deputy over a 10-year period here in Jefferson County, where I logged thousands of hours in a police car. My approach as sheriff employs compassion, common sense, transparency, accountability, and collaboration. It will include community input. It will include protecting your constitutional rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Next, we will have Mr. Hansen.
Good afternoon. My name's Tom Hansen. I'm the Republican candidate for Sheriff of Jefferson County. I have a retired lieutenant from Jefferson County Sheriff's Office with over 20 years experience here in Jefferson County and a total of 30 years law enforcement experience with 10 years as a military policeman in the U.S. Army. I feel as though I'm the proven leader and proven law enforcement leader to lead the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office into this coming age. I think that I will prove that Jefferson County needs a law enforcement officer to lead its office, its department.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Next, we will have Mr. King.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on this afternoon. My name is John King. I spent 32 years with the United States Capitol Police in Washington, D.C. I ran operations from K-9 to SWAT to bomb squad. I worked for the Deputy Chief for Administration. I ran the finances. My K-9 unit, when I retired, had a budget of $14.3 million. I understand all the aspects of purchasing, contracting, you name the gamut of how to run the department. I understand policy. I understand the culture. I understand all the aspects that are needed at the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you, Mr. King. Next, we will have Mr. Cox.
Hello, thank you. My name is Steve Cox. I'm an independent, politically unaffiliated candidate for sheriff. I have over 20 years of professional law enforcement experience. I hold a West Virginia Governor's Law Enforcement and Professional Standards certification. I am also an accredited instructor with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. I've served as a local police officer in Jefferson County, and I've been an instructor throughout the world. I'm currently a small business owner. I've been granted licensing from the Secretary of State in the 23rd Circuit Court of West Virginia, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. And Mr. Lance, 30 seconds to introduce yourself.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Gregory Lance. I'm currently a resident of Jefferson County. I've lived here all my life. I've had experience for 20 years in county government. I became mayor of Hansen when I was 24 years old. and I had 4 terms as mayor, and I supervised the police force in Hansen. I also served as county commissioner for 12 years, funded and balanced the budgets for the sheriff's office and the other offices that I'm running for. And I believe that you need someone from Jefferson County. I'm a lifelong resident, first graduating class out of Jefferson in 1973. Have business and finance from Shepherd College. I believe my experience and the other things I bring to the office are going to allow me to have the experience to do the job for the residents of Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Now we will begin our question and answer period. Mr. Lance, you will have the question first. The first question is, what will be your top 3 priorities if you are elected sheriff?
I think my top 3 priorities are, number 1, to ensure that the taxes and the tax receipts are collected in Jefferson County and followed up with, because that is one of the most important jobs of the sheriff. In addition, I believe we need to continue looking at the drug problem and deal with that, and also deal with the financial issues that are facing county government, that we can continue to have a sheriff's force that is funded and adequately help the needs of the people in Jefferson County.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Mr. Hansen, what will be your top 3 priorities if you are elected sheriff?
My top 3 priorities are: 1, to make the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office proactive as opposed to reactive, to get patrols out there to be seen and to show the colors of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, to be able to people see and know that they're there, to feel secure. Second one is to make a coalition between the local sheriff's office around us to fight the COVID, and I should say the opioid problem. We're not an oasis, we're not an island. There's jurisdictions around us that will help us, and we will help them fight the opioid and drug crisis. And lastly is to be more responsive to the citizens of Jefferson County, to be able to answer questions and be there for the citizens of Jefferson County.
Mr. King, what will be your top 3 priorities if you are elected sheriff?
The first priority is to make sure that the budget is set up, it's submitted right away at the end of January for the sheriff's office. That's got to happen first. Second priority is to reach out and make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the citizens and develop a better community outreach program to include all the churches and other organizations within Jefferson County. My third priority right off the bat is to also try and work on doing better mental health and better mental health first aid for the offices within the sheriff's office, to include the tax office and everyone else. I think the stress of the COVID-19 and the current situation in the county, we need to look at a little bit more training to be able to deal with the situations and the people without putting them in the system.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Chapman, what will be your top 3 priorities if you are elected sheriff?
It's really hard to pick 3 because I have so many, but if I had to roll my platform up into 3 key points, it would basically be: 1, keeping our community safe; 2, improving community relations; and 3, the training and recruitment and retention of our current staff. Now, those things actually work together, and the ultimate goal of the Sheriff's Department is to keep the community safer. So, like improving relations, I have some programs, some outreach programs that I want to explore to get the deputies and the community unified a little better. We want to build trust between the community. Only way we do that is for deputies to get to meet members of the community and vice versa. As far as training and recruitment, we need to continue to train our deputies. There's some training programs.
We'll move to Mr. Cox, and if we can get Mr. Chapman back, then that's absolutely what we'll do. Mr. Cox, if you could give us your top 3 priorities if you were to be elected sheriff.
Well, I'm going to agree with Mr. Chapman. The number 1 priority is safety of our citizens. But working towards that goal, we really need to look at the addiction within the county. The addiction drives a lot of the crimes that we have. I'm going to support any and all measures that's going to help with that. Public relations, we need to have a better relationship with the public. We need to do things that's going to encourage the public to come out and meet with us so they can meet us one-on-one. And from there, there's probably the second biggest threat I see in the sheriff's office is the officer morale that we're experiencing. It's at an all-time low, and we're gonna get that back up. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. We'll move to our second question, and we'll continue to try to get Mr. Chapman back on the Zoom call. With governmental budget cuts, employee layoffs, closing of many businesses within the county, and lost revenue from reduced tax base, what is your plan to ensure the sheriff's office is fully funded and staffed? Mr. King, if you would take that question for us first. You have 1 minute to respond.
Well, with the current situation of the taxes, we're not sure exactly what's going to be in the budget in the next 6 months. What's going to get paid, what's not going to get paid. When it comes to budgeting within the government, you really need to stack your priorities. The salaries of the employees is going to come first and foremost. Make sure that they're paid. Unfortunately, equipment will fall second in the priority order for the sheriff's office because you won't be able to refurbish, get new cars, get new things. That'll be a second priority. Unfortunately, training really needs to be ahead of the equipment. So actually the picking order will be salaries, the training, and the equipment for the sheriff's office. And you just have to budget within our means and what we have. I see a serious revenue loss from the casino. I see a serious loss in the county for everything, for the business taxes throughout the entire county. It's going to be a tough time financially and mentally on the community as well.
Thank you, Mr.
And
King.
I see a lot of struggles for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Cox, you'll have the question next. With governmental budget cuts, employee layoffs, closing of many businesses within the county, and lost revenue from a reduced tax base, what is your plan to ensure the sheriff's office is fully funded and staffed?
So we're going to have to maintain the budget as it is right now. Hopefully we can afford the budget. We just went through 3 months of business shutdown. The racetrack shutdown, that's one of our biggest items for money. It shut down for 3 months, it's reopened, and it hasn't even reopened completely. We just don't know how this is going to affect us until we move forward. But increases in budgets can't happen. Increase in manpower is not going to happen right now. We're going to have to find ways to maintain our essential service as the sheriff's office through the money that we're going to be allotted from the county commission.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Lance, with governmental budget cuts, employee layoffs, closing of many businesses within the county, and lost revenue from a reduced tax base, what is your plan to ensure the sheriff's office is fully funded and staffed?
First, I believe we need to be aggressive with the state and attempt to get financing wherever we can. I believe that it's important that we continue with the DUI program that Mr. Sheriff Doherty has been very successful in, and that is just to ensure that we protect the people. But I was a big supporter of the casino. I was on the county commission when it was put in. They said best case scenario, county share is going to be 1.2 million. It ended up being about $8 million. So I think we need to get aggressive and try to ensure that the racetrack is fully supported in any way we can, so we can generate the money that we need for the cities and the county in Jefferson County to meet the needs of the physical constraints on the budget and the staffing of the police department, and also allowing us to have some physical responsibility to help with the school situation.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, With governmental budget cuts, employee layoffs, closing of many businesses within the county, and lost revenue from a reduced tax base, what is your plan to ensure the sheriff's office is fully funded and staffed?
Well, first of all, as it's been said before, we had loss of money through the racetrack, and not only that, the hotel taxes and stuff like that have fallen because of the hotels being closed. So we have to be creative about finding financing. Besides the general funding, we have to look to the state to try to help them reimburse us some of the money that was lost through the closed businesses. But we also have to look at things like federal grants and state grants that are available. While I was with the sheriff's office, I wrote every grant that the sheriff's office got until I just retired. There are DUI grants that have been for overtime. There are federal COPS grants for manpower, and there are other grants through the federal government for equipment. So we have to be creative and work towards other means of financing besides looking at our budget, because we know the budget's going to be on a shortfall.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Mr. Chapman, I'm glad we could get you back on the Zoom meeting.
Thank you. I apologize for that. My Wi-Fi crashed.
Well, and right now with COVID-19, we're all finding out what the limits of our internet services are.
And I do live out in the country, so.
You missed about 15 seconds of your answer. And so what we're going to do is just add 15 seconds at the end when you have a minute to wrap up. You were finishing up your thought on the top 3 priorities.
Okay.
And we want to give you a chance to finish your thought on that. So we'll add 15 extra seconds at the end. But now we're on question 2. And that question for you now, Mr. Chapman, is with budget cuts, employee layoffs, closing of many businesses within the county, and lost revenue from a reduced tax base, what is your plan to ensure the sheriff's office is fully funded and fully staffed?
Well, that's a good question. The sheriff's office is already understaffed, which I think we all know that. We need additional deputies. So, and the county, despite business closures, is growing. So if we are actually subjected to a budget cut, it's going to be difficult to maintain our current level of service, which is key. So what can I do? Well, when you're faced with a budget cut, you can do 2 things: increase revenues or reduce cost. As far as increasing revenues, what can we do there? Well, we can't have a bake sale. That's not an option. So I have some ideas that we might be able to improve our collection on taxes. Now, these are things that are outside of the current 11A tax code, so I'd have to get them vetted. But we might be able to improve revenues a little bit there. I will aggressively pursue public and private grant funding as a means to boost our revenue. And as far as the other side of the equation, cutting costs, I intend to do a complete needs assessment of the sheriff's office, a complete process map of all of the sheriff's organizations, and consider automating where possible.
Thank you for your response. We'll move now to question number 3. What do you believe the role or the relationship should be between law enforcement and Jefferson County schools? The first person to answer that will be Mr. Cox.
Thank you. That's a great question. What is law enforcement? That's the role that we need to play, and we need to keep our nose in the business of law enforcement. I believe that when it comes to schools, we should work with the schools to help provide security at the school. I don't want to be the disciplinary arm of the school. I'm not interested in doing that, but I do want to provide security. I like what Mr. Williams has been doing in the school. I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from him or from other people about his activities. He's not just a cop in the school. He's actively taking a role as an educator and helping the children in somewhat of a counselor type of situation. That's fine and dandy. I love it. But when it comes to law enforcement in schools, I believe that the sheriff's office should be responsible for the protection, security, and safety.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman, what do you believe the role of law enforcement or the relationship should be between law enforcement and Jefferson County schools?
I think that that relationship between law enforcement and Jefferson County schools is key to a safer community for a lot of reasons. I'm a big fan of our PRO program that we currently have in place, and I would actually be supportive of expanding that into our 4 middle schools. Well, that's not exactly true. Charlestown does have a presence in Charlestown Middle School, so 3 middle schools. I think that the middle school level PRO would have a little bit different touch, but the bigger picture here is that when you have a law enforcement officer in schools, children grow up around police officers. They learn that they are people who they can trust, who they can confide in. They feel safe around police officers, and they grow up having a better impression of law enforcement, and they're more respectful of law enforcement. And I think that helps make our community safer in general. I also, I like having law enforcement personnel in the schools. I have a program that I want to do called Dining with a Deputy, where a deputy adopts a school, goes in, has lunch with the children, and the idea is to use that as a substitute for the PRO program.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, what do you believe is the relationship or the role between law enforcement and Jefferson County schools?
Well, Jefferson County schools are very big in my heart. When I was a deputy in 1995, I walked into Jefferson High School and said, "Hi, I'm Deputy Hansen. How can I help you?" And I was the liaison for Jefferson High School through until I became this first school resource officer at Jefferson High School in 1999. I was there from 1999 to 2000. The SRO program is a program, and West Virginia calls it a PRO program, that establishes a liaison between the children and the officer. It gives them a role model. He teaches class. When I was there, we had the fatal vision goggles, and we would set up cones for the seniors in high school and ones getting their license to drive through cones with the fatal vision goggles. Those are all things to show the children that the cops are not all, the sheriff's office and officers are not all bad people. They are there to help. I had children that were having problems at home, or children having problems with relationships, that would come into my office and sit down and talk.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Mr. King, what do you believe is the relationship or the role between law enforcement and Jefferson County schools?
I believe that not only just the schools, but the whole entire community needs more outreach. But when I've observed some of the officers the deputies go into the schools, I watched them walk through the school. They didn't interact with any of the children, the young people. They just kind of made us walk through the school. I think assigning each deputy a school and building a relationship, but you have to also educate and train your deputies what expectations you have when they go in the school. That they sit down with the children and have lunch, or go out on the playground, kick a couple balls with the kids and sit down and talk with them and build that rapport and the trust. Because without the trust, we're not going to get the children to really react in a positive light with law enforcement, which is what we want. When a child is under duress or has a problem, we want them to be approachable and be able to come to the law enforcement and say, "Hey, I've got a problem at home," or I've seen something that I want to talk to you about. That kind of rapport needs to be built with not only the schools, but the teachers and the staff also.
Thank you, Mr. King. And finally, Mr. Lance, what do you believe is the relationship or the role between law enforcement and Jefferson County schools?
I think it's very important. I think the liaison should be in each of the schools if possible, if we have the manpower. But I think more importantly, in the times that we're living in, where sheriffs and police officers are having issues of trust, that it's important that the kids from high school on down realize that the police officers are not their enemy. They're there to protect them and help them in their life. And I think whatever we can do to place resource officers in there, we should, to try to make sure that they're not afraid of a police officer, that they're willing to walk up to him and say they have a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Our fourth question, gentlemen. What do you believe community policing is, and do you support its use in Jefferson County? Mr. King, you'll take that question first. What do you believe community policing is, and do you support it in Jefferson County?
Community policing is critical. I had a deputy chief that used to go out once a week with me, and we would walk through neighborhoods and talk to the local people in civilian attire and sometimes in uniform. When I interacted with anyone in the public, I always gave them my business card, whether I wrote them a ticket or whether it was an arrest. Anytime I had a contact, I gave them a card, even if it was just interaction on the street. Down the road, these people would reach back and contact me because I was willing to answer their questions even after the fact. It's a little step further that opens that window, but we need to start with all the organizations in the county, have regular meetings with them, including going up onto the mountain and meeting at the substation up there and building rapport with the community so they can trust us. The trust is key. This country's going through a lot of stress right now with, defunding the police, and we need to build that relationship back 100% with the people so they really know that we're out there to secure this county and keep it safe for all the residents of Jefferson County.
Thank you. Mr. Lance, what do you believe community policing is, and do you support it in Jefferson County?
I do support it, and it goes back to the issue I said before. A lot of times, not only in schools, but in communities, the people there are your ears and your eyes of the police department. They see what's not right in the neighborhood. They see where there's a problem. And if they're willing to communicate with the police department and the sheriff, they can maybe stop some of the drug issues that we have, but also the other criminal issues and activities that are occurring. So I think it's very important.
Mr. Chapman, what do you believe community policing is, and do you support its use in Jefferson County?
Community policing means a lot of things. In cities, it's actually assigning an officer to a neighborhood so that there's the familiarity, but we have 4 deputies covering 212 square miles, so that's not really feasible. But the other parts of that for me, I do want to employ parts of the community policing system. That's community outreach, community availability. I want to be available to the people of Jefferson County. So many problems can be solved or short-circuited ahead of time if people just know they have a line to the sheriff. One of the programs I want to do is called Coffee with a Cop. Once a quarter, I'll pick a different coffee shop somewhere in the county. We'll try to cover the whole spectrum, and there'll be public meetings. So myself and my chief deputy will attend, and it'll give you a chance to air your grievances. If you've had a good experience, tell me about it. If you've had a bad experience, tell me about it. Tell me what's going on in the community that might not have merited a 911 call, but it's still a problem that you would like to see solved. Tell me what we're doing wrong. Tell me what we're doing right. The Sheriff's Department works for the people, and we want to do a good job.
Mr. Cox, what do you believe community policing is, and do you support its use in Jefferson County?
So over 20 years ago, when I took a community policing class, it was much different than what it has progressed into these days. What I actually believe community policing is, we really ought to get rid of the word policing in that. It's working with the community to find resolution in issues that we have. Resolutions that don't involve handcuffs. For instance, again, back in the early 2000s, we had a local playground that was completely destroyed by juveniles. We were well on our way to charging juveniles with the destruction of this playground equipment. However, instead, I got the approval to the prosecuting attorney and my chief of police. We had the parents on board. I took the kids down with some of the parents, and we rebuilt the playground. That's community policing.
Thank you. Mr. Hansen, what do you believe community policing is, and do you support its use in Jefferson County?
First of all, of course I do support it. Community policing means that being out there, being seen, working with the community to resolve problems that are going on in the community. I'm going to start a program called Evening with the Sheriff, where people get off work, and come to the sheriff's office, sit down and have coffee or a donut, law enforcement food, and talk to the sheriff about problems, or if there's an attaboy, get an attaboy. But none of the other things I want to do is, the sheriff's office has patrol areas. I want to start my deputies that are out in their patrol area, stopping in a local establishment, stopping in a store, stopping into a driving by and see somebody out and about doing walking, stop by and talk to them. Community policing means being seen. Community policing being responsive to the community's problems and responsive to the community's needs. The men of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office need to be responsive and proactive to the community's needs.
Thank you. We'll move to question 5. There have been a number of videos that have surfaced around the country that appear to show an excessive use of force by law enforcement on members of the Black community. If you are elected sheriff, will you commit to intermittent training on use of force, recognizing implicit bias, and general diversity training as a proactive approach to guard against similar incidents happening in Jefferson County? And that was a long question. Mr. Hansen, I won't read it again, but you have 1 minute to respond.
Yes, ma'am. Well, let me start out by saying that for the last 16 years before my retirement at the West Virginia Air National Guard, I was the diversity and equal opportunity NCO for the state of West Virginia's 167th Airlift Wing. I believe very wholeheartedly in diversity and putting the right person in the right job and training. I trained individuals with the 167th every weekend during drill weekend. There's a proper amount of requirement as training needs to go, and the right subject matter. And to teach the deputies how to deal with subject matter, how to deal with problems involving all races. And as with my experience as the EO NCO for the base, I know what you need to look for and know what needs to be trained for our deputies to be responsive to all factors or factions in our county.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman, if you are elected sheriff, will you commit to intermittent training on use of force, recognizing implicit bias, and general diversity training as a proactive approach to guard against similar incidents happening in Jefferson County?
Yes, absolutely, I will. There's a whole lot to this. Definitely training. We want to continue to train our guys, but some things that I think are underlying problems or potential underlying problems are the community trust. One of the things that we need to do as a sheriff's department is we need to hire minorities, not more minorities, just minorities. We don't have any. It's very hard to recruit these days, and I've got a very detailed recruiting program that I want to deploy to try to get more diversity inside the sheriff's office, because I think when you have that on your staff, it does provide the public a better sense that you are fair and unbiased. It's tragic when any of these things happen in the national news, and I haven't seen any evidence of that kind of stuff here. But that being said, I think it's important that we get out in front of these kinds of things, that we build a level of trust with the community. And it goes back to everything else I've said about the community-oriented policing and the recruitment, and that will help prevent these kinds of things from happening.
Mr. Cox, if you are elected sheriff, will you commit to intermittent training on use of force, recognizing implicit bias, and general diversity training as a proactive approach to guard against similar incidents happening in Jefferson County?
So let's go back to my opening statement. The last 10 years of my law enforcement career has been spent as a law enforcement accredited full-time instructor, and I've taught at every level throughout the world. I don't believe that there's a candidate before you today that appreciates training as much as I do. I've written and developed and delivered content to students. I have recently spoken with a private company who wants to get involved with the hands-on force type situations that we're looking at that you mentioned in your question with the videos. They want to develop a system that's going to help prevent what we see on TV. But with that said, we have to realize that law enforcement is inherently hands-on and physical.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. King, if you are elected sheriff, will you commit to intermittent training on use of force, recognizing implicit bias, and general diversity training as a proactive approach to guard against similar incidents happening in Jefferson County?
Absolutely, and it's more than just training. It's actually educating your people and continued process of educating your people. But beyond the education is the documentation. When in my agency, we had 1,800 gun carriers. There's lots of hands-on things going on with people and people getting injured. You need to document and go back and investigate and look at every case individually to make sure that the use of force was justified for the situation as far as use of force curriculum. And that there's a lot of documentation and guidance from the Justice Department how to do that everybody usually follows. As far as diversity is also looking at your community. If you have such a population of minorities and different races and different backgrounds, you put those people plugged in to your department, and it really it's so effective in not only the enforcement, but the trust and the building in the community. There's many situations, for example, if you have a sexual assault, you don't want a man coming in to do an interview with someone who's just sexually assaulted. You need someone that they can relate to.
Thank you, Mr. King. And Mr. Lance, if you're elected sheriff, will you commit to intermittent training on use of force, recognizing implicit bias, and general diversity training as a proactive approach to guard against similar incidents happening in Jefferson County?
Absolutely. I think it's important. I think we should continue doing that the best we can and realize that there are different types of situations that police officers get in. Sometimes it's race, sometimes it's juveniles, sometimes it's drugs, and we need to try to make sure that everyone that works for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department is ably trained to deal with those situations as they appear on a routine basis.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. And actually, Mr. Lance, you're going to take the next question first. Do you believe the diversity within the sheriff's office is consistent with the diversity countywide? And if not, will you commit to increased recruiting efforts to identify women and people of color qualified to serve?
I do, because I think that's important, that your department should reflect all different people in that community, whether it be race, ethnicity, schooling, education. You want to have a good balance in county government so that when the people of Jefferson County look at what is there is a true reflection of the people that live in that county, so they don't feel that any group is not represented on the police department.
Mr. Hansen,
Yes.
do you believe the diversity within the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office is consistent with diversity countywide? And if not, will you commit to increased recruiting efforts to identify women and people of color qualified to serve?
Right now it's not, but you have to work at recruiting people. They're having a tough time hiring police officers all over the country and not finding applicants, but you have to go out and find them and try to get them to join the department. You have to make sure that they meet all the requirements to be hired, so you're selecting the best candidates. I did the background investigation on the last 2 females we hired, because at one time I was the only background investigator for the department. So you have to go out and look, you have to recruit, but you have to make sure that they're all qualified and meet the requirements to be a deputy sheriff and to be a law enforcement officer. It takes a long time to be accepted and hired by a police department. A lot of many steps you go through, and you got to make sure that everyone meets all those requirements. But yes, you have to go out and really, really recruit good people, good officers that will be a shining example of law enforcement for this county.
Thank you. Mr. King, do you believe the diversity within the sheriff's office is consistent with diversity countywide? And if not, will you commit to increased recruiting efforts to identify women and people of color qualified to serve?
Yes, ma'am. I believe that we really need to look at the current level of the sheriff's office. There's not a lot of diversity at all. And recruiting is more than just recruiting from within your county. You need to reach back. Our department did a lot of things back in the day where we went out to universities, we went out to job fairs, we looked outside to get people to come and to work in our department and work in other places. So one of the things that we need to look at too is the veterans. We've got a lot of veterans getting out. Go back to this Pentagon and look at some of the boards and things that they're putting out to try and recruit some people to come into Jefferson County. Former military people are already disciplined. They've proven themselves in the government service. I think they're a great resource for this country that we're underusing. And we need to look at those kind of people to come here to Jefferson County to help us out if we can't fill the void from within. We may not be able to find enough applicants and minorities here in Jefferson County. So we need to reach back and come up with other measures to find people that would like to come and live in a wonderful community like this.
Thank you. Mr. Cox, do you believe the diversity within the sheriff's office is consistent with diversity countywide? And if not, will you commit to increased recruiting efforts to identify women and people of color qualified to serve?
Thank you. Absolutely. You can obviously see that the department is not represented as if you compare it to the community. But what this comes down to is the recruitment and how we recruit. Putting an ad in the paper and word of mouth is not a good recruitment program. And as a leader, you have to be able to see where your faults are. And the faults are within the recruitment. I am not a recruitment expert, but I know people that are. I know companies that are. And I plan on using that resource to increase our recruitment so that we can get a good, fair representation of our community within our office. It needs to be there, and I plan on making that happen. However, we have to remember the sheriff actually isn't even responsible for the job. It's the Civil Service Commission. They are solely responsible for recruitment, getting the process done. The sheriff gets to choose from one person out of 3 to fill one position.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Chapman, do you believe the diversity within the sheriff's office is consistent with diversity countywide? And if not, will you commit to increased recruiting efforts to identify women and people of color who are qualified to serve?
We currently have little to no diversity in the sheriff's office whatsoever. And it's not because we haven't tried, it's because the system is flawed. So what can I do to help the system to drive more people through the testing and hopefully get them hired? I've got several programs that I want to work on. I don't know if you realize this or not, but the local high schools have a forensics class. We've got a PRO in the high school. Those kids have a propensity to want to go into law enforcement. So let's encourage them. Let's offer them encouragement. Local jobs for local children. Shepherd College has a criminal justice program. They also have it's called a Handshake. It's a program where the students can work with local businesses, maybe on an internship, but it gives us a leg up in recruiting them into our system. Blue Ridge also has a program, criminal justice program. So if I time the testing around high school and college graduations, I've got more people that are willing to apply. If we test at odd times throughout the year, all these graduates are already moving into Maryland and other agencies that are actively snapping them up. We need to keep them here.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. And actually, you'll take our 7th question first. What procedural or operational changes do you believe are needed within the sheriff's office?
Procedural or operational changes needed within the sheriff's office. Well, one of the things that I think we definitely need to do is update our policies and procedures. I don't know when the last time that was updated, but I don't think it's been modernized for a lot of today's situations. And we can do that pretty easily. Just get a team of the senior leadership together and borrow policies and procedure manuals from other larger departments that have already worked through a lot of the kinks and basically fit that to our needs. As far as other things that we need to do, I plan to do, like I said, a complete needs assessment and process mapping when I actually get in the seat. And then we're going to look at ways to streamline, ways to make the office more efficient. If deputies are doing admin things that maybe we can automate, then we're going to automate them so we get more boots on the ground. The idea is to have deputies out on the street doing things that deputies need to do to protect and serve us. I know one of the examples that came to light was that a deputy was spending 5 hours doing payroll. That could easily be automated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Mr. Lance, what procedural or operational changes do you believe are needed within the sheriff's office?
I think one thing we need to talk about, and we haven't talked about the tax department, the tax collection part of the revenue stream for Jefferson County, which primary responsibility is for the sheriff to be the treasurer, to ensure that the taxes are collected. And I think one thing about that department is they are very efficient and they are very, very well trained at what they do. But I think we need to look at if there's changes that we need to make it more efficient, easier for the people in Jefferson County to pay their taxes. I think we need to look at that, as well as any procedural changes that we need to deal with the sheriff's department, whether it be with the drugs, the policing. And again, I said it's important that we continue with Mr. Doherty, what he has done with the DUI situation. So I think there are a number of changes we can make, and we just need to look at each department and see how we can make it more efficient than it currently is today.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Mr. Hansen, what procedural or operational changes do you believe are needed within the sheriff's office?
I've already mentioned one of the things. The deputies need to be, as I said before, more proactive as opposed to reactive. They need to be out in the community. They're going to establish patrol areas where the deputy will be in that patrol area. If there's 3 deputies, then 2 of the and one will be the supervisor and 2 will be in certain, kind of be cut in half. If there's more than that, they'll be in selected areas and they'll be seen and out and about. The problem we're having nowadays is that you see a deputy because you've had a crime, you call the number, they respond, and that's all that you see. One of the other things I want to do is I want to establish a point of contact. If you're a victim of a crime, you can call the sheriff's office and talk to this one individual who will contact that deputy that's taking your report or doing the investigation, because he may be on midnight shift or he may be off for the next couple of days for vacation. So he or she will be the point of contact for you if you are a victim of crime, so they find out what's going on with your case. You need to have a communications with the sheriff's office at all times.
Thank you. Mr. King, what operational or procedural changes do you believe are needed within the sheriff's office?
Well, I agree with Mr. Hansen on respect to the sector scout responsibility. That's critical that people have assigned areas of responsibility. We do a better job in our policing. We do direct patrols in higher crime areas. That's from the operational street point. One thing we really truly need here is an actual pay scale for these guys so that they can see where they're going to be in 5 or 10 years operationally as far as the pay goes. Policy, I'd like to see them come into CALIA standards, which is a federal law enforcement certification for the agency. It develops guidelines and policies and procedures, which are actually reviewed by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and you become accredited. That's a really key thing. On top of that, I'd like to see programs where the deputies have more collateral responsibilities. So we're doing more with less. We're being able to train people in crime scene. So we have specific deputies who are assigned to do crime scenes in addition to the road. We have deputies who are going to be doing more crash investigation. Right now, we only have one certified crash investigator in the sheriff's office. We need to have people that are doing other things, community outreach and different other resources.
Thank you, Mr. King. And finally, Mr. Cox, what procedural or operational changes do you believe are needed within the sheriff's office?
Thank you for the question. I'll go back to what I've heard a couple of the other guys state and talk about with technology, but I'm going to leave it at that. If as a leader of something in today's world, if you're not looking at technology, then you're not doing the job. So let's move on from that, talk about policy and procedure. Very good friend of mine, my former lieutenant, now police chief of Hansen Police Department. I knew the day he got in his job last year exactly what he was going to do, and that was look at the 30-year-old policies and procedures and update each and every one of them. And I'm sure the sheriff's department is in the same position that they need to have that entire book looked at, reviewed, and updated. From there, I think in general, one big, huge thing that the county can benefit from is patrol sectors. We have got to get guys in sectors doing the job of law enforcement, not in town running 20 minutes out for a prowler call. They've got to be in the neighborhoods, and that's what I'm going to do is get these guys into the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Question 8, Mr. Hansen, you'll take that question first. The use of illegal drugs is a reoccurring issue in the community. What will you do differently to curtail the flow and sale of drugs within Jefferson County?
What I want to do, and I've stated before, is I want to start a coalition. I work with the Loudoun County Sheriffs, Frederick County, Virginia, Frederick County, Maryland, Washington County, Maryland, and Berkeley County, West Virginia, and form a coalition of those law enforcement agencies around us. Again, Jefferson County is not an island. The drugs come in from one area, they go out from other areas. We have opiate or heroin addicts that make 2 and 3 trips to Baltimore a day. We need to stem the tide, and the only way to do that is to work with all of the local agencies in the area. To work with, if the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office is going to have a checkpoint at a county line, then we'll be on the other side. We'll be working with them. If Clark County is going to do the same thing, if there's going to be some operation going on in across the board in Sharpsburg, then we'll be nearby in the Shepherdstown area, so that we can all work together and we can all try to stem this tide. It's a epidemic, but it's not just happening here, and it's not just this is not an island or an oasis.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Mr. Lance, the use of illegal drugs is a reoccurring issue in the community. What will you do differently to curtail the flow and sale of drugs within Jefferson County?
I think the most important thing is, as you did before, they had a task force that had 4 or 5 different communities meeting on a regular basis, talking about the areas that the problem areas were with drugs, and focusing on that with all the other people in the different communities, so you have a good communication, so they know the people that they are concerned about, and by tracking them, they can also track the people that they are buying and selling drugs from.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Mr. Chapman, the use of illegal drugs is a reoccurring issue in the community. What will you do differently to curtail the flow and sale of drugs within Jefferson County?
What I've come to realize is that we cannot arrest our way out of this problem. We just can't do it. We've been doing that for 40 years now, and we still have a problem. Now, are we going to continue to arrest people that traffic drugs? Absolutely. But what we have is the economic principle of supply and demand. As long as there's demand for drugs, there will be supply. And as soon as you eliminate one supplier, another one pops up. So what we have to do is fix people. We need to fix the addict. We need to focus our attention, instead of arresting and incarcerating drug addicts, we need to treat them. We need to treat the chemical addiction, then treat the problem behind the chemical addiction. Maybe it's mental health and they're self-medicating. And then we need to get them back into society. And we're doing that. It's called our Day Report program. I would like to see resources added to the Day Report program so that we can fix our drug addicts, so we can reduce the demand and then see the supply go away. Putting them in jail is not the answer. Putting the addicts in jail is not the answer. Putting the pushers in jail is.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Mr. Cox, the use of illegal drugs is a recurring issue in the community. What will you do differently to curtail the flow and sale of drugs within Jefferson County?
What we have relied on in law enforcement or as a society to fight this war on drugs is handcuffs and badges. It does not work as the only game plan. We have failed to see the most critical component, and that's addiction. We have to, as a community, get behind our addiction services. If we can curtail the addiction that's going to drive our demand down, law enforcement can be much better at stopping the drugs before they get to the end user. So I believe that addiction services is probably the biggest thing that we need to focus on. It drives every single crime practically in this county.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. And finally, Mr. King, the use of illegal drugs is a reoccurring issue in the community. What will you do differently to curtail the flow and sale of drugs within Jefferson County?
Well, the drug problem has three issues that really come up to play. First is enforcement. With respect to enforcement, I'd like to bring the DEA in and give them an office here, let them run their drone, the camera, card reader, tag reader technology, let them put in their matrices together, let them run their own kind of quasi enforcement program. Treatment. What most people don't understand about treatment is very, very difficult. Most people who get on some of the drugs they're using for treatment, 6 months after they try and wean them off, they go back to the drugs. So you need to look at some of the addiction almost as being like high blood pressure, where these people are going to be on some of these treatment drugs probably the rest of their lives. Treatment is a huge part. We need to follow through with all of the treatment and get more treatment if we can in the county. The last part of the phase is education. Right now, we're really not, I know everybody says don't use the drugs, but we really need to get the young people understanding how this affects your life and your career and bring this forward and make sure that we're doing the right things to save our young people.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Cox, you'll take our next question first. If elected, are you committed to increase training in the area of human trafficking? And will you identify a deputy to serve on the Human Trafficking Task Force?
So human trafficking has become in my opinion, in a recent pandemic, the third most talked about issue. It sits just behind COVID-19 and the protests and rioting that we see. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that it was as bad as what I am now learning. It's always been an issue. I've been involved with the process in the past. There was an agency out of Florida that I worked with back in about 2004-05 to help them with a connection they had in this area. But obviously, if we need to assign a deputy, if we need to form a task force up here, then I will jump in and lead that to fruition.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Chapman, if elected, are you committed to increase training in the area of human trafficking? And will you identify a deputy to serve on the Human Trafficking Task Force?
Yes, yes. I am committed to resolving our human trafficking problem, and I will commit a deputy to serve on the task force. I think that in a lot of cases, human trafficking goes back to our opioid problem. You know, there's a lot of this happening to fund drug addiction. So these things don't necessarily exist in a silo to themselves. They're interrelated. So if we continue to work on our drug addiction, we can also help drive down some of the human trafficking concerns as well. So I plan to take a sort of an all-encompassing approach to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Mr. Lance, if elected, are you committed to increase training in the area of human trafficking, and will you identify a deputy to serve on the human trafficking task force?
I am, because I think a lot of the human trafficking that is occurring has to deal with drugs, and also with the COVID-19 situation and the number of people that are put in situations where they don't have money, they're on the streets. A lot of people are being humanly trafficked for purposes of drugs and other issues. So I think it's important, and I think we should put someone specifically on that to try to make sure that that amount of people involved are decreased. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Mr. King, if elected, are you committed to increase training in the area of human trafficking, and will you identify a deputy to serve on the human trafficking task force?
Yes, I'm committed to educating, training, and whenever we need to identify people that are in risk and are involved with human trafficking. Human trafficking is not just people involved with narcotics or prostitution or other things. They also look for people, indigenous servants, and other purposes throughout the country to traffic people. People come here as illegal immigrants. They get trafficked into sweatshops and get trafficked into other situations. So we need to not put ourselves in a box here. We need to look at the totality and train all our people to look for those people in the community and look for them wherever we can find them, and have a single person who's responsible for the sheriff's office to work with the task force to overlap relationships, matrices, and communicate with other agencies to see where they might occur in our own county. And work with the state, and we'll get whatever resources are necessary to make things flow.
Thank you, Mr. King. And Mr. Hansen, if elected, are you also committed to increase training in the area of human trafficking, and will you identify a deputy to serve on the human trafficking task force?
Yes, ma'am, I will. A trained deputy is a good deputy. Our deputies need to know what's happening in our communities, not just in Jefferson County, but all around the area, all around the world, and how people are being trafficked. Human trafficking, like our opioid, is a scourge on humanity. We need to be able to try to stop it, and the only way to stop it is to know about it. And to know about it, you need to be trained them, and you also have to have the people that have the expertise to help stop it. So you would reach out to people that have an expertise on human trafficking to try to train our people to make sure that they know what to look for when it comes time that there's an incident that may involve human trafficking.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. And gentlemen, that concludes our question and answer portion of the forum. Now, each candidate will have 1 minute, and Mr. Chapman, you'll have 1 minute and 15 seconds to offer any additional information for consideration by our viewers. Mr. Chapman, actually, you'll take this question, or you'll introduce yourself or wrap up first. Again, you have 1 minute and 15 seconds.
First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this today, and I want to thank any of our citizenry that takes the time to watch this. Thanks for being involved in the community. I'm Mike Chapman. I'm applying for the job of Sheriff and Treasurer of Jefferson County. My background makes me uniquely qualified to improve all aspects of the organizations the Sheriff's oversees: tax office, law enforcement, animal control, and court security. I've created a blueprint for the Sheriff's office under my watch. This contains items above and beyond perfunctory duties like arresting criminals, collecting taxes, protecting the courts, etc. I do think it is important to note that The blueprint contains only highlights of what I want to do. The actual detail is much, much, much more involved. And you can find this blueprint document at electchapmansheriff.com. There's also links to it on my Facebook page. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, mike@electchapmansheriff.com, or call my cell phone. My number is 304-279-6297. I will take your call. I'll be happy to talk to you. I humbly ask for your vote this fall. I'm the right candidate for the job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Mr. Hansen, you also have 1 minute to wrap up and offer any additional information for consideration by our viewers.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending this important event. I'd like to thank the moderator. I'd like to thank the Jefferson County League of Women Voters for inviting me to participate in today's forum and allowing these important issues to be heard. I'd like to thank my opponents for participating. I love Jefferson County and I'm proud to live here. I want the residents of Jefferson County to have the faith in the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office that we have their best interest at heart. I have 30 years of law enforcement experience, including military, and retired from the Air National Guard, and I've spent time leading troops. I'm the only candidate with 20 years of experience in Jefferson County. I have the front line serving and protecting the citizens of Jefferson County for 20 years, the period of our county's most rapid growth. When I moved here, there was only one place open at midnight, after midnight, and that was Denny's. I pride myself as a leader, and I know I'm the leader who can take safely through the next 4 years. I firmly believe in the experience counts. I want to be the first Republican sheriff ever elected in Jefferson County, and I would ask for your support on November 3rd. If you'd like to contact me, you can contact me at hansonforsheriff.net on my website, or hansonforsheriff@comcast.net. And my phone number is 304-886-2912. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Mr. King, you also have 1 minute to wrap up and offer any additional information for consideration.
Thank you all so much for having me at the Women League of Voters. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all today. I have 32 years of law enforcement experience as K-9 commander, physical security specialist, did all the gamut of the operational part, but I also have the administrative background. And I have the passion, I understand the stress. I'm the only recently retired law enforcement person running for office. And when I retired 2 years ago, I wasn't planning on coming back to work. Mr. Jack Hewitt and a few people in the community convinced me to run for sheriff. I told them I was an independent. They said, well, that works for us. And so I've moved forward in this, and I've decided that when I was going to run, that I'm not going to take a salary from Jefferson County. I'm doing this as a public service to give back to my community, which I wholeheartedly want to do with the other activities that I do, which is the JCCM, the Ransom Garden, the Mayor's Committee on Homelessness. I want to be involved with the community and support the community and make sure that the safety and security of the residents and the treasury of Jefferson County are kept to the highest standards possible.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Cox, you have 1 minute to wrap up, offer any additional information for consideration.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the two entities that brought us here today. I'd like to thank Ms. Crockett for moderating the event. Thank you very much, ma'am. Again, my name is Steve Cox, and I am running for sheriff as an independent and politically unaffiliated candidate for sheriff. I believe the sheriff's office should be politically unaffiliated, and I have recently seen how the parties have gotten involved with the sheriff's office, and the actions of the current sheriff has been very political itself. We need to end this. Law enforcement needs to keep out of that political arena and do their job. Okay. Furthermore, take a look at my experience at coxforsheriff.net. You will see that I am the most experienced and diverse individual here running for sheriff. I have over 20 years of law enforcement experience. I'm looking forward to November. I hope I get the votes, and I hope I see everybody as sheriff come January. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Lance, you also have 1 minute to wrap up and offer us any additional information you'd like us to consider.
Thank you. A lot of people have a lot of experience in a lot of different things. and I also do myself. I was mayor when I was 24 years old. I ran the police department. I arraigned people at the jail. I also served over that department and ran that department for 6 years. But I have also was county commissioner for 12 years, from 86 to 98. And one other thing I have is I was on the board of directors of the West Virginia Municipal League. I'm the only county commissioner from Jefferson County that ever served as president of the County Commissioners Association. And I've been involved in that for a lot of years. And I am committed to the people in Jefferson County. I have experience, I have knowledge, I've had experience in government. I've also have other experience tax-wise, as far as being accounting degree at Shepherd College. And I've got 20 years of knowing what the people in Jefferson County need and in producing results for 20 years. And I think my broad experience gives me an opportunity to offer the people of Jefferson County something that some of the other candidates do not have to offer.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. To the candidates, thank you for taking time to speak with us about your candidacy for Sheriff of Jefferson County and the very important issues facing our community today. To our viewers, we'd like to remind you that the general election occurs on November 3rd. The last day you have to register to vote in the general election is October 13th. Early voting runs from October 21st through October 31st, including Saturdays. For those who are concerned about voting in person, in order to vote by absentee ballot, you must apply for a ballot. Concerns for exposure to COVID-19 is a valid basis to request a ballot under the provision, other medical reasons, which keeps me confined. The last day to apply for an absentee ballot for the general election is October 28th of 2020. The application is available online through the Secretary of State's office. If you request an absentee ballot, it's important to remember that should you decide to vote in person, please return the ballot at the polling site. Otherwise, your in-person ballot will be considered a provisional ballot until the county clerk verifies that your absentee ballot requested has not been cast. On behalf of the membership of the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County and the members of Eastern Panhandle Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, we would like to thank you for viewing this virtual debate forum. We have recorded debate forums for a number of additional contested races in the 2020 general election that are available on our Facebook pages, the Facebook pages of the League of Women Voters and the EPAC chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. Again, thank you for taking time to view this debate forum.